the tactics and the framing of things are different. The Bush administration has been utterly discredited and repudiated, unprecedented. We have to immediately move to overturn the Military Commission Act, probably the worst piece of legislation passed. Well, I think it probably surpasses the Alien and Sedition Act that denies habeas corpus, that gives the U.S. and the President the secret ability to define torture, that pardons everybody for war crimes that have been committed, and come to some, I think we should do now what we failed to do around the Vietnam War, which is a new form, a U.S. form of a Truth and Reconciliation independent commission to hear testimony about the last 8 years and to find out who was responsible for the worst crimes that were committed. And then I don't really care what happens in terms of how much prosecution and who's sent to jail, but I think an honest recounting and an honest listening of who's paying the price for these policies from the top is really called for. I've been teaching a class on torture for the last 6 years. We had a young man who was in Iraq come talk to the class. He was an interrogator and came to realize that what he was doing was torture and left the military and has written a book about it. He just reflects to me one of hundreds of thousands of young people who are struggling to come to an ethical understanding of their own life and their role in relationship to power in this moment. And I think our attention, the 60s is past. It's interesting, it sets a context. I think without the 60s, we wouldn't be where we are now. And yet, I think Bill and I feel very much like our job is to live in the present and to be part of today's social struggles.
How does it feel to be speaking in the press, Bill Ayers, right now? You haven't for many, many months since your name was first invoked.
Well, I mean, I speak all the time, so it doesn't feel that unusual, although I didn't want to comment on the presidential campaign while it was going on to the media, so that's the only thing that I didn't do. Again, I couldn't find a way, I couldn't think of a way to disrupt the, the dishonest narrative of guilt by association or the dishonest narrative of unrepentant terrorist. I couldn't find a way to object to that and push it back. So that's done now and moving on.
And Bill, in the decision to resurface after 10 years that you and Bernardine made with your two boys, how did you resurface? What is the process?
See, I thought you were going to speak to that when
I
you started.
meant to speak to that.
Why don't you say something?
There were charges against me. We didn't know. Bill was his usual generous and patient self after the end of the Weather Underground organization.
Which was right at the end of the war.
Which was in 1976, right after the United States. Well, let me just divert for 1 minute. How did the war in Vietnam end? This is one thing from the past that we might note here, because to listen to the Republican campaign, you would think that somehow the U.S., wasn't defeated in Vietnam, that something shameful happened. In fact, the U.S. was militarily defeated and driven out of Vietnam, both by opposition here and by the Vietnamese people. So we might just note that moment, because how the war ended does matter in terms of how this war might end better, sooner, quicker, save more lives. But we, I was stubborn, and I couldn't bring myself to turn ourselves in. So Bill was generous and easygoing and let me come to it by myself. We regrouped. We had a life organized around our two children, and we worked at a school and worked at jobs and became child-centered parents to the best of our ability. I came to realize after the birth of our second child, who's now a teacher, a middle school teacher, that we couldn't continue like this, and that there was no political reason for us to stay underground. So we agreed to turn ourselves in Chicago. and not completely knowing whether there were secret charges or what had happened. Of course, all the federal charges from the old days had been dismissed because of massive illegal FBI activity, and several FBI agents had been indicted. So we came to Chicago, left our two boys with dear family friends, not knowing what would happen, and walked the gauntlet really into a hive of media. That's my main memory of it. And then went back to our fifth floor walk-up apartment in New York and resumed our lives there. Just changed our names, as the kids said.
And like everybody else, made our twisty ways towards, back to school, to work, and that's what we continue to do, trying to figure out how to name the moment that we're in, how to participate in it. We've been very involved in the last couple of years in a movement-building process with lots and lots of friends, and we're hopeful.
Well, Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn, we want to thank you very much for being with us. Are there any final regrets, and also what you felt so far as you've led your life above ground, underground, and then above ground again, what you felt were the greatest successes?
You know, of course we have regrets. I think our sectarian errors, but they're easy to say, Amy, and really hard to do. That's what I've come to realize. We can list off, what we wish we'd done better. I've written about it extensively. Bill's written about it extensively. But doing it right, of course, is hard. I think we have an opportunity now for unity, for connecting issues, and for popular organizing. That's how I see it. In my lifetime, I've seen young people change the world. So I remain very hopeful in Birmingham, in Beijing, in Soweto, in Seattle, at Stonewall. Young people standing up, not with any particular tactic or with any particular form of militancy. The bus riders into the South changed the world. So we're in a perilous moment, but tremendously hopeful moment.
I think that I would echo Bernardine's regret. I think that if we've learned one thing from those perilous years, it's that dogma, certainty, self-righteousness, sectarianism of all kinds is dangerous and self-defeating. So to me, the rhythm that we've tried to live our lives by and that we urge on our students and others is open your eyes, see the world as it really is, act, take some action within the world, engage, and then importantly, and something we forgot to do in 1970, doubt. Act and then doubt. Question yourself, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? And then act again. So that rhythm of opening your eyes, seeing the world, acting, doubting, it seems to me is what ought to power us forward. What I'm proudest of, what I feel most strongly about, is that we've had this extraordinary 40 years together. We've raised 3 of the most extraordinary young men that I can imagine, and they continue to kind of help us, inspire us, awe us. And I guess the other thing is, I think that Bernardine mentioned that we had her mother living with us for the last 5 years of her life. We had my father living with us for the last 3 years of his life. They both died at home with a lot of dignity, and I guess I feel that's the best accomplishment, those 2 things, our kids, our parents, and onward from here.
I want to add one last thing. The best of the New Left and the best of the social struggles of today have at their core the valuing of human life, all human life. You have to say both parts of that, because the people in the United States have to find our place in the world and in some ways get off the necks and the backs of the people of the world. We have to live differently. We have to live, and I say this with all humility too, we have to all together learn to live differently so that others may live. And so that core notion that animates social justice movements is really the valuing of all human life.
Bernardine Dohrn, law professor at Northwestern University in Chicago. Bill Ayers is an education professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago. If you'd like a copy of today's broadcast, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. Up next, Professor Noam Chomsky, his first major address since the election. Stay with us.